The morning air over Brandenburg is hard and bright. It is March 6, 1944, and the contrails run like ruler strokes toward Berlin. At 25,000 feet, a Mustang slides down the sun line, belly tanks scabbed under each wing, its pilot watching black puffs from the city's flak belt step higher through the bomber stream. He is not weaving in tight formation. He is angling out, eyes on a climbing gaggle of Bf-109s forming at the edge of the haze. In the interphone, a clipped voice. "Red flight! Push!" The P-51's pilot thumbs the bomb release toggles, feels the 108-gallon paper tanks tumble away, and shoves the throttle to the stop. The Merlin comes on like thunder. In seconds, the American is among the German cover flight, breaking the enemy formation before it can reach the fortresses. Below, a 672 U.S. heavy bombers drive for the capital. Above, the Luftwaffe's home defense system scrambles to keep up with a form of escort it did not expect. Fighters that are not going to sit beside the bombers and wait to be attacked. By nightfall, 69 bombers and 11 escorts will be missing. But for the first time, the Germans have watched P-51 Mustangs fight over Berlin in daylight. And it will not be the last time. They had been told the Americans could not do this. The distances were too great, the fuel too tight, the winter weather too fickle. Yet the contrails keep reaching east, day after day. And the whine of Merlin-powered Mustangs now rises out of every ambush the Reichsverteidigung sets. Berlin's flak towers and Würzburg radars can mark the bomber stream, but the fighters streaking ahead of it are hunting for the interceptors themselves. That is the shock. Not just the airplane, but what the Americans are doing with it. Here is the thesis. The Luftwaffe's doctrine assumed it could mass fighters against the U.S. bomber stream and chew it apart. The U.S. Army Air Forces believed the bomber stream could be carried to target if the fighter escort became a system of long-range dominance, not a close protection ritual. The contest was system versus spirit. The Reich had seasoned pilots, radar nets, and a capital ringed with guns. The spirit to fight on home ground. The Americans brought a new system. Cheap, long-range Mustangs, drop tanks in industrial quantities. A command decision that fighters would attack German fighters first, last, and always. The Luftwaffe expected escort fighters tied to bomber wings. Instead, they got P-51s operating far out in front, behind, and alongside, cutting into the German assembly cycles. Once the Mustangs reached Berlin with fuel left to fight, the odds on every engagement shifted. The stakes were not abstract. By early 1944, the combined bomber offensive had entered a hard arithmetic phase. Destroy the fighter force and the fuel that sustained it, or accept prohibitive bomber losses and lose the summer. Big Week, February 20-25, 1944, opened the account by hammering aircraft factories while U.S. fighters claimed 241 kills, and German records indicate 225, 275 fighter losses, heavy damage. But not a knockout. The payoff came when the escort problem was solved at scale. With fighters able to reach deep Germany and turn the defense inside out, the planners drove straight for oil. Leuna, Merseburg, Brux. German aviation fuel output fell from 180,000 tons, April 1944, to $50,000, July, and $10,000, August, starving both frontline units and training commands. The timing mattered. The Allies needed air superiority before Normandy. The P-51's range and the new escort doctrine made that window open, and stay open. German doctrine had been logical, built across years of night defense and regional control. Controllers fused Freya early warning and Würzburg tracking to vector interceptors. Flak belts saturated the approach corridors. Dayfighter wings, Jagdgeschwader, rotated through the Reichsverteidigung to conserve strength. The concept assumed predictable escort arcs. P-47s or Spitfires would peel away near the frontier. P-38s would fade early in winter. The bomber stream, bright as a highway on radar, could be measured and met with massed attacks from front and rear. This system worked whenever the escorts ran out of gas or obeyed close cover. Fighters tethered to bombers, reactive rather than proactive. Even the first daylight Berlin missions cost the Americans dearly when the Luftwaffe got organized in the target area. The logic looked sound until the Mustangs began arriving with fuel to spare and orders to break up the interceptor fight before it touched the bombers. On the American side, the design philosophy was brutally practical. The P-51BC married North American's clean airframe to a Packard-built Merlin, then added fuel, an internal fuselage tank, and standardized underwing drop tanks. With two 108-gallon externals, the Mustang's escort radius exceeded 650 miles, in other words, to Berlin and beyond from East Anglia. The airplane was also cheap, about 58,824s in 1943, meaning it could be fielded en masse. Radios were standardized. Navigation aids and beacons knitted fighter groups to VIII Fighter Command, and maintenance shops learned the Merlin's needs fast. This was not the fastest fighter at low altitude, nor the sturdiest in a dive, but it could arrive where the fight mattered, stay, and return with the bombers. That last verb was new. On March 6, 1944, first contact over Berlin wrote the tactic in fire. The bomber force split its routes, drawing the German defense in multiple directions. In the last 100 miles, Luftwaffe formations tried to assemble out of cloud gaps and sun angles, a practiced drill of climb, align, and slice through the stream. The P-51 groups were already out front. Some held escort windows, some roved as free hunters. When contrails tangled near the city, Colonel Don Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group pushed hard, and the claims that night were A-26 German aircraft. An emblem more than a statistic, but it captured the feel. Escorts no longer content to be a shield. The cost for the day was still high, 69 bombers, 11 escorts, but the shock was that the Americans had the reach and the intent to fight over Berlin itself. 2 days later, on March 8th, 462 bombers returned with 174 P-51s over the target, and again the defense bled. The turning point was not a single dogfight. It was a decision. In January 1944, the 8th Air Force's new commander, Major James H. Doolittle, ordered a doctrinal break. The escort's first duty was not to bring the bombers back alive, but to destroy German fighters. He later called it the most important and far-reaching decision I made during the war. In practice, that meant pushing fighters 25 to 50 miles ahead, fanning to the flanks, and pouncing on the German units as they formed up, then strafing airfields and rail on the way home. The result appeared in the math. The average monthly loss rate for 8th Air Force heavy bombers fell from 5.1%, 1943, to 1.9%, 1944, even as missions drove deeper and harder. Logistics, not heroics, made this possible. The 8th Air Force ramped from roughly 274 operational fighters to 882 within months in 1944. Operational bombers from 461 to 655. The P-51 itself was a gift to quartermasters, easy to produce, maintain, and fix in the field. By war's end, 15,000 Mustangs of all types had been built, feeding not just the 8th, but the 15th Air Force in Italy. Ammunition, drop tanks, and propellers arrived in rhythms that let commanders schedule. Continuous deep escorts with overlapping fighter groups from coast to target to coast. A conveyor belt of little friends that did not stop at the German frontier. Intelligence and control stitched the system tight. New scouting forces, small P-51 flights, ranged ahead to report weather, flak concentrations, and interceptor activity in real time. Fighter control squadrons kept VHF nets alive, fixing and homing stragglers, pivoting cover as bomb wings drifted or split. The Germans still had solid radar and controllers, But escort groups now had their own forward scouts and could slide windows left or right to cut into forming Jagdgeschwader. The more the escorts fought on their timing, the less the bomber stream took the first heavy punch. Human capital decided the exchange rates. The U.S. pipeline by mid-1944 usually sent fighter pilots forward with $400 total and 160 operational hours. German trainees, starved of fuel, often arrived with 160 total and 25 on type, with minimal instrument time. Veterans on both sides remained deadly, but the replacement curves diverged. When U.S. Mustangs could choose fights, diving with speed, keeping altitude, engaging or disengaging at will, those training gaps turned into survival gaps. Tactically, the winning side refused the enemy's preferred fight. The Luftwaffe wanted head-on passes into dense bomber formations and tail chases through contrails, where single-engined interceptors could make fast, savage cuts and escape. Doolittle's approach made that fight rare. Escorts preempted assembly, slashed at climbouts, then shadowed the bomber stream, not welded to it. Free hunts punished airfields and rail yards, and escort windows were timed so fighters appeared whenever and wherever the German defense tried to remass. The point was not to linger, it was to disorganize. None of this made the Luftwaffe toothless. On sharp days, March 6, 1944 among them, the defense inflicted real pain. Over the Leunemersburg oil triangle in late 1944, flak farms and well-handled Me-109s and FW-190s turned some missions into meat grinders. In November-December 1944, heavy AA sometimes shot down more U.S. bombers than fighters did, and late-war German jet units, when fueled and well-led, could still bloody an escort screen. The Mustang's range did not neutralize weather, flak, or mistakes. It just forced the fight every day the weather allowed. Roll up the numbers conservatively. In Big Week, U.S. fighters claimed 241 kills. German records support 225-275 losses. On March 6, 1944, the 8th lost 69 heavy bombers and 11 fighters, while P-51 groups like the 4th FG reported 226 German aircraft destroyed on one Berlin mission. On March 8, 2010, Farantiu E-74 P-51s covered 462 bombers over Berlin again. Across 1943-1944, 8th AF bomber loss rates fell from 5.1% to 1.9% monthly, and German fuel production collapsed through the summer of 1944. Which was the point? Make the defenders fly less, train less, and lose more when they tried to fly at all. Psychology followed arithmetic. Luftwaffe reports and Allied interrogations show a pattern. Controllers struggling to assemble coherent intercepts under constant escort pressure. Pilots complaining of fuel limits. Leaders lamenting that gifts from Speer's factories sat idle for want of gas and trained hands. Meanwhile, U.S. bomber crews, who had learned to expect every deep mission to be a gamble, saw the escort cycle fill out. Fighters at rendezvous, fighters at mid-route, and fighters in the target area. The fragile belief that we can't get there from here broke. Doolittle's maxim, destroy German fighters, felt less like bravado, more like a plan the system could actually feed. The next 12 months expressed the result. June 6, 1944 brought an invasion beach almost untouched by German air power. E-70 fighter sorties the first day in France, a historical whisper where a scream had been expected. In the autumn, the oil war pinched training and operations further. And on March 24, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails, out of Italy, escorted B-17s all the way to Berlin and back, engaged 25 Me-262s, shot down 3, and earned a distinguished unit citation on a shuttle-length mission that proved the range claims in red paint. The last combats over Germany looked chaotic, but they were the predictable end of a system that had been breaking the defense since winter. There is one necessary ethical paragraph. The same system that enabled daylight escort also enabled sustained bombing of urban and industrial targets, with civilian casualties and POWs suffering on the ground. Strafing runs against airfields and transport hit soldiers and non-combatants alike. The logic was operational. Break the defense, cut the fuel, shorten the war, but the consequences were human and lasting. Any numerical discussion should hold that reality in view, even as it measures sortie counts, loss rates, and fuel tonnage. Legacy came in doctrine as much as hardware. Post-war air forces kept the long-range escort principle as a core competency, even as jets and aerial refueling changed the math. The Mustang's cost-efficient performance, range first, then speed and teeth, echoed in Cold War decisions about fighters that could arrive and endure. The escort windows, scouting flights, and controller networks fed into later air superiority doctrine. Preempt assembly, deny initiative, strike the enemy's fuel and training base, make the sky a place where only one side can choose to fight. So return to that March morning. The first Mustangs over Berlin dumped their tanks, light the Merlin, and cut into the interceptors before the bomber stream is touched. Cold contrails tear, reform, and drift in the east wind. If you need a metaphor, take this. The bombers were the anvil, heavy and slow. The P-51s, their system as much as their spirit, were the hammer that could reach the enemy's forge and swing on time, every time. Over Berlin in 1944–45, it was the math of range, fuel, and doctrine that did the hitting.